Welcome back, everyone. Oil pan is on, timing cover's on, and I made myself a little support brace. So I hope everyone had a good week. I've been busy out here on the engine. And of course, where we left off last time, I did get my covers on. Ended up putting the timing cover on here. Got that chain all lubed up nice. And I had this engine flipped over and I ended up putting on my oil pan. Now also, one thing to keep in mind here when you're getting this oil pan ready to go, there's two spots they got to watch for. The block where it meets the timing cover, there is a space there. And also on the back of the engine where the oil pan comes up against the main seal block on the back. There's a little gap on each side. I ended up putting a little bit of Ultra Blue. I just kind of rubbed it in there with my finger to fill the gap and just put it over just a little bit so that when I set my cork gasket in for my oil pan, it squished it up nice and tight. And I can rest assured, or hope anyway, that I have a good seal. So it is now time to start getting some of the main components, actually the rest of the engine, back together. Other than a couple little odds and ends and a couple seals, minus the intake and carburetor, of course. I've kind of left that. That's going to be left to the end once a lot of work gets done on the car. But I should have everything really to finish off this engine. Now, I've moved into the first head. Getting it cleaned up, getting it ready to put on the block. I've gone through and I've cleaned everything again, double checked everything, make sure there's no sharp edges or any curls over here so that the heads sit flat. Cleaned up the cylinders. The exposed part is going to get one more rub of oil on all sides just to make sure that stays good. And I was just going over my Mopar book here, double checking things. And I've come across something and a little bit confused. So I had to do a little research because I did find an issue. So the issue comes from this step here. Step 18 if you're following the book. But when I test fitted the head gasket, which I've had for quite a while now, and I just kind of glanced at them, they looked fine. But looking at this picture, you see these squares here. They're quite large. And you can tell by this one, you can see the hole in the block. Right, so when I come over here, the holes on the top side or the bottom side are huge. And the three here, those little squares I've shown you, they're big holes too. I can fit my finger in them. These are my head gaskets. Not this hole. This little line, this little slot that's cut. This is how mine came. And this is a Felpro. And they do quote a lot of Felpro products in there. So I'll throw this on the head and I'll show you what I got going on. Alright, here's my head. I've got it up here. I've got it all wiped down. Again, I was checking all the edges. And I threw in a couple dowel pins that I'm going to need in the block when I do it. And I thought, I'll check the fitment of my head gasket. Now these here are the large holes that you can see on the block side. And like I said, they're big enough to put your finger in. Now, the little slots. Once I line my head gasket up here, and get it into the right spot. Everything is correct. This is what I have now. This little tiny hole. It's not even a quarter inch across or a quarter inch up. All three of them just barely catch the head of that gasket. And that concerned me a bit, considering that everything else has been perfect. I kind of wondered what was going on. Now, there are this hole and this hole that aren't on this gasket, but they don't show them in any of the books. So I did some research, kind of looked into it, read some forums, and then I also went out to the donor engine and I grabbed the old head gasket as well. I don't know why I kept it. I'm kind of glad I did. And I can see at the top here, there's little rust circles here on each side because there's no holes here, just like my gasket. So that's perfectly fine. But down here, it looked like someone put a die grinder in here and chewed those right out. So if I take this gasket, now it is dirty, so I'm going to have to clean my head again, and I put it on, you can clearly see that somebody has ground those right out. Now, both sides are gone, and I'm assuming because this is a shim style steel gasket, it's eaten this out over time with rust and corrosion. But you can tell that those holes have definitely been opened up. And what I found online is that's kind of the general consensus, is that these engines, depending on the year, from 62 to 67, I think, the 361, 383, and the 400, this hole here, it kind of moved back and forth, right? You can kind of see where that original gasket was, right? And this hole kind of moved in a semicircle from up there to down and back up. And that's why they say this hole is like this. But my thought was, well, why wouldn't you just make that hole the actual size of this over to here, like this whole open space? And I don't know what the purpose is. Maybe they're worried about corrosion or whatnot. But it's something I'm definitely going to take care of. So what I'll end up doing is I'll actually measure that hole with a caliper, and then I will come back here and mark this out and trace that out. I'm going to have to make up a little steel punch out of a metal so I can make one clean hole straight through, just like these. And going by all the other marks and holes that are on here, I'll find what the relative distance is to the firing ring to make sure I'm not getting too close. And I think that will solve my problem. Whew. It's finally that time. Have everything here. All items are cleaned, washed. Everything was test fit. We should be good to go. Hopefully we don't have any issues along the way here. So I got my head gaskets complete. I managed to cut the holes out just like the original head gaskets were that I kept from the engine. And also going online, I found a lot of other spots that showed those larger holes. And a couple people on forums talking that if you're using the Fel-Pro kits, you do got to open them up. So, got the headset on here. Just running my first set of bolts. Making sure I got a little oil on the end of the threads. We want a true torque rating when we put these in here. So we do the first set that goes underneath the rocker arm assembly. Then we have some lower ones that are deep down inside the heads that are internal as well. And then we got our final set that is on the outside that we see when you actually look at the engine. And yeah, that'll be it. So I'm going to just finish fingering these in. And then we'll get the old torque wrench. We'll start getting the torquing. So there we are. Heads are on. Man, those bolts, they pop down there. I love it. She is looking beautiful. Looking fine, fine, fine. Man, I can't wait to hear this thing roar. So that is all the head torqued. We went through in 3 increments. So we did the 30. Then we did another 20 and another 20. So we went 30, 50, 70. And 70 is the recommended torque for this engine. I'm not using ARP bolts. If you're going with ARP, you would move it up to 80 foot-pounds. Now, there is a specific sequence, of course, this all goes in. Now, my next step is getting these lifters ready to go in. Now, I'm going to give these one more rub down with a lint-free rag, and then I'm going to set them in a little tray. I'll make sure they stay in their respective order. But I'm going to let these soak for a few hours, just to kind of pre-charge them. The oil will slowly seep down in here and the air will slowly come out. But I'll kind of pre-charge them a bit, soak them real good. And then I'm going to get some the assembly lube. I'm going to make sure I go down all my holes for my tappets to make sure that everything is smooth as can be. All right, so all the tappets or hydraulic lifters are cleaned and lubed up well. All the holes where they're going are clean and ready to accept their tappet. Now, of course, I got my board marked 1 to 8. This is the left side of the engine, starting off at the front is how I got them marked out. And they're going, all they're doing, just falling right into the hole. And there we have all the tappets in their right order. You kind of see down in there where they're coming in contact with the cam. It all went in smooth, no hard edges that I could feel, just a nice smooth insertion. So now we're on to push rods. Now these are all cleaned as well, ready to go. The only thing we're going to be doing with them is the end going down into the tappet. We'll be, of course, giving them a little dab of semi-lube as well too, just to make sure they have something really good in there to get them started. And also, we will be priming the engine, but for the most part, it will be sitting for a bit, quite a bit, before it's ready to go in this car and get cranked over. So we want to just make sure we got all the protection we can on all these parts. All right, got our assembly board back here, and we got a little cup of goop here. This stuff is just horribly sticky, but that is what we want. So got the first couple in. The push rods just going right down here, right through the head. Then we can get them right into the socket there on the tappet. Give a little turn just to make sure it feels smooth and that we're in the right spot. And then that lubrication gets all spread around there. So our board, we're working on the right-hand side, of course, the front. So here's our front of our engine and our right-hand side. And we can just slowly work our way across. And then we know we got all our rods right where they came out of the other engine, the donor engine, when they're running. So it's going to take a little bit here. Go through, get these all in. A little turn. And we'll check back when it's finished. Now we're ready to throw on the rocker assembly. So I've also gone through and I've put a little dab of semi-lube on the top of the valves, right where the rockers are going to sit. This is a bit of a pain in the butt. These assemblies are all one. They're not individual, just the way this Mopar big block is. So it's going to take a little bit of time to get this lined up. But we're just going to basically get it in place. On one end, we're going to just get a thread or two turned in there. And once we get our semi-aligned, just like that, we're going to go through starting at one end, getting our push rods in place, making sure they're in the nice little pocket here, and work our way all to the end. And then we'll do a double check before we start starting to snug this down and set it in place. And there we have it. Rocker assemblies are snugged onto the engine. They're not torqued down yet. When you put this on, one side is going to be a little harder than the other, depending on where you're at on your firing order, depending on the engine. On this big block Mopar, this was top dead center. And this side was actually easier to put on. There was less of the pistons on their stroke coming up, or moving the valves, I should say, than it was on this side. So once you, when you line this up, you get it on here, you're going to start setting them in, starting from one end, lining up your push rods all the way along, making sure that they're in all the pockets. You don't want to have one by mistake fall out and actually have it down underneath the arm. You want to make sure they're all in the little pockets as you go. Then once you get that on, I'm going to grab your ratchet or whatever you're using, no impacts, just ratchet, and you're going to start tightening these 5 bolts. Now don't just start at one end, crank it down till it touches the base. There is pressure on all these push rods, so you want to make sure you got a nice even squish. So you're not cranking down one end and this bar ends up being like a banana because it's touching here and you're, an inch up over here. So just bring it down, bring the bolts down till they touch the back side of the mounts. Touch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then go and do like like a turn here, you know, maybe like a half turn, half turn, half turn, half turn. Just work your way across. So you're slowly bringing that rocker assembly down even as you can and straight. And then once they touch the base, just one little snug, and then go back and double check all your push rods to make sure they're in the pockets. So now that we got all our push rods lined up and we know they're in the right spot, you know, some will turn really easy. They'll be nice and smooth, and that's just what we want. Some will actually be pushing hard. Like if we look here, this one is actually on the stroke to start opening the valve, so it's got some good tension on it. I can slowly turn it, but it's got some good tension on it. Now once we prime this engine, these will all be pushed out to where they're going to be. We'll be running a drill, turning the oil pump, priming this up, which is going to fill the oil galleys that go on the push rods. And as we slowly turn this engine over, the oil is going to be going into the inlet, filling the chamber, and these will start becoming rock solid, and they'll be taking up all our lash and all our gap in our valve train. Now, I don't have my tool yet to go down through the hole. That's the bushing there where the oil pump drive goes down into. It's also the gear that drives off the end of the cam is also what runs the ignition as well too. Runs a distributor cap. Now for a tool, all it is, it's a 5/16 Allen key wrench, but it needs to be about almost 13 inches long. So probably gonna have to make one, cut one up and make one. You can buy them for 30 bucks, but it seems ridiculous for the little bit of time it's gonna use. So while I'm waiting, I've actually gone and put a few extra things on. So the first thing I've done is gone ahead and threw on the harmonic balancer. Now, in behind here, you want to make sure you got the end of that shaft lubed up real good. And of course, it sits against the seal that's in the timing valve cover, or timing set cover in there. So you want to make sure you get a good amount of lube around that and kind of work this on by hand. It kind of rocks back and forth until it starts getting too stiff. And then you don't want to start beating on it. You don't want to hit it too hard because you don't want to be thrusting that crankshaft back. But if you have a rubber hammer, you can lightly just tap around it. And all you're doing is tapping around the outside edge of the harmonic balancer till you can get about 1.5 to 2 turns of threads on your nut. Now once you get those couple thread turns on there, brace the back of the engine. I end up just using a punch, going through one of the hole plates here and into one of the bolt holes that are in the back of the crank. And put a strong arm on there, and you'll find that even though it was hard to start, when that bolt is pulling from the center, pulling that in, it actually will go really easy. And once you get it down there and flush, grab the torque wrench, and that goes to 135 foot-pounds. Now I just wetted the seal on this oil filter here, and I just cranked this on hand tight just to close that up. And again, like I said, we'll prime this engine, so we need to put a filter on there. The next thing was the water pump. Actually, the water pump housing. This is the water pump. This has nothing to do with it. This is just a housing that goes to the engine and pushes the fluid down the block. So inside here, they do come with a set of gaskets. I end up throwing a little bit of ultra blue as well too around the surfaces because they are a little bit pitted, just rusted from, you know, years of sitting and just also the years of use as well too. And then of course, all the bolts go around and they only go to 30 foot-pounds. Now this one here, this is not permanent. I only got this in here to set the pump up until everything dries up and seals. This does come out. A water nipple goes in here, and this gets a different bolt that holds onto a bracket that'll hold my alternator and then goes over into the heads. So that's all I really got for this video. I think it went quite well. I'm really happy to finally get these parts on here permanently. And this thing is starting to really look like something. She's starting to come along. As always, I appreciate you guys stopping by. Appreciate all the subscribers we're getting lately. We're hitting 600. That's awesome. We're just passing. So anyway, as always, thumbs up, greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. Catch you guys again later.